There was a time when silence felt safer than speaking, when words stayed trapped inside the mind because fear had built walls around confidence. Fear of mistakes, fear of judgment, fear of not being good enough. But truth is, no one is born fluent. Fluency is not a gift. It is a decision repeated every single day. Speaking English is not about sounding perfect. It is about expressing yourself without shrinking your thoughts. Every person who speaks fluently today was once afraid to speak even a single sentence. The difference is not talent. The difference is practice. Consistency over perfection is the foundation of real fluency, because language is not built in a single moment of brilliance, but in repeated exposure, repeated effort, and repeated willingness to try again even after making mistakes. Most learners stop themselves before they even begin speaking properly because they are waiting for a perfect level of grammar, a perfect vocabulary range, and a perfect pronunciation that does not actually exist in real life. The truth is that perfection creates pressure, and pressure creates silence, and silence blocks progress. When a person chooses consistency instead of perfection, they allow themselves to enter the learning process without fear of judgment. Speaking daily, even in broken sentences, even with hesitation, even with incorrect grammar, slowly builds a natural comfort with the language that no textbook can provide. Each day of speaking becomes a small deposit into confidence, and those deposits accumulate over time into fluency that feels natural and effortless. Mistakes are not interruptions in this process. They are actually the core material through which improvement happens. Every incorrect sentence reveals a gap in understanding, and every correction creates a stronger mental connection with the right structure. When someone speaks regularly, their brain begins to recognize patterns instead of memorizing isolated rules. And this pattern recognition is what allows speech to become automatic rather than forced. Inconsistent practice, on the other hand, keeps the mind restarting from zero every time, which makes progress slow and frustrating. Even a short daily habit of speaking for a few minutes can be more powerful than long hours of practice done once in a while. Because repetition trains the brain to stay active in the language continuously instead of switching off between sessions. Consistency also builds emotional resilience, because the more a person speaks, the less intimidating the language becomes, and the fear of making mistakes gradually loses its strength. At the beginning, every sentence may feel like a struggle, but over time that struggle becomes familiar, and familiarity turns into ease. The mind stops treating English as something foreign and starts treating it as a medium of expression. This transformation does not require extraordinary talent, only the willingness to appear imperfect in front of oneself again and again without stopping the effort. Many learners underestimate how powerful small daily actions can be, because they are always searching for big breakthroughs. But fluency is not a breakthrough moment. It is a collection of small moments that feel ordinary while they are happening. Speaking every day creates mental momentum, and momentum is what carries a learner through difficult phases. When motivation is low, even on days when confidence is missing, consistency keeps the practice alive, and that continuity ensures that progress never completely stops. Over time, words that once felt difficult begin to appear naturally in speech. Sentence formation becomes quicker, and hesitation between thoughts reduces because the brain is no longer translating but directly expressing ideas. This shift happens slowly and almost invisibly, which is why many people underestimate it in the beginning. But it is the most important transformation in language learning. The focus on perfection often creates self-criticism, and self-criticism leads to avoidance. But consistency replaces criticism with action, and action gradually replaces fear with familiarity. A person who speaks imperfect English every day will always progress faster than someone who waits to speak perfect English someday in the future. Because that future moment never arrives without continuous practice in the present. The beauty of consistency lies in its simplicity. It does not demand talent. It does not demand ideal conditions. It only demands showing up again and again, even when progress feels invisible, even when sentences feel broken, even when confidence feels low, even when there is uncertainty about improvement. And as this habit continues day after day, week after week, the language slowly becomes part of natural thought, shaping expression, shaping confidence, shaping the way ideas are formed and delivered without hesitation or fear of mistakes. Fear is temporary, silence is permanent, and the space between these two decides whether a person grows or stays stuck in the same place for years without realizing how much potential has been locked inside hesitation. Fear appears every time you try to speak something new, every time you think about expressing yourself in a different language, every time your mind predicts that mistakes might happen or someone might judge your words. But fear is not a sign to stop. It is only a signal that you are stepping into something unfamiliar. It rises quickly, feels powerful in the moment, but it does not stay forever unless you keep feeding it with avoidance. Silence, however, is different. Silence does not disappear on its own. It becomes stronger every time you choose not to speak, every time you avoid practice, every time you let hesitation win over expression. What begins as a small pause slowly turns into a habit. And that habit becomes a barrier that feels heavier with time. Many people think silence is safe because it protects them from making mistakes. But in reality, silence protects fear, not the person. It keeps growth on hold and convinces the mind that staying quiet is easier than trying. But ease is not always progress, and comfort is not always improvement. Fear loses its power only when it is faced repeatedly, because fear depends on avoidance to survive. The moment you step into speaking despite fear, you begin to weaken it. Even a single sentence spoken with hesitation is stronger than hours of thinking without speaking, because action breaks the cycle that fear builds inside the mind. Silence, on the other hand, creates an illusion of safety. But that illusion slowly limits confidence, expression, and opportunity. When a person remains silent for too long, they begin to believe that they are not capable, not ready, not fluent enough. But these beliefs are not facts. They are outcomes of inactivity. Language is not built in silence. It is built in sound, in repetition, in correction, in continuous attempts to express meaning, even when words feel incomplete. Fear always makes the situation look bigger than it is. But once you start speaking, you realize that mistakes are not as dangerous as they seemed in your imagination. Each attempt reduces fear slightly, and each spoken word creates familiarity, and familiarity slowly replaces fear with confidence. Silence delays this transformation, because without practice the mind keeps restarting the same cycle of doubt. Many learners wait for confidence before speaking, but confidence does not come first. It is the result of speaking despite fear. The more you remain silent, the longer you delay your own progress, and the stronger fear becomes in controlling your actions. Fear only exists in anticipation, not in action, which means it grows in the mind but shrinks in experience. Once you begin to speak, fear starts losing its imagined power and turns into something manageable. Silence, however, does not challenge fear, it preserves it. And what is preserved without challenge eventually becomes a limitation. Every person who is fluent today was once in a position of fear, but they crossed it through speaking, not by waiting for it to disappear. The difference between someone who grows and someone who stays stuck is not the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. Fear is temporary because it fades with experience, but silence is permanent if it becomes a habit that replaces action. When fear appears, it demands attention, but it does not demand obedience. You can acknowledge it and still move forward. When silence appears, it feels easier in the moment, but its long-term effect is delay, and delay slowly turns into regret. Speaking, even imperfectly, breaks the authority of fear, because every spoken word proves that fear is not in control. Silence never gives that proof. It only reinforces doubt. Over time, those who speak grow into confidence without noticing the exact moment it happens, while those who remain silent often wonder why progress feels out of reach, not realizing that progress requires participation, not observation. Thinking in English instead of translating from your native language is one of the most powerful shifts a learner can make, because translation slows the mind, creates hesitation, and builds a gap between thought and expression that blocks natural fluency. When a person constantly translates every idea before speaking, the brain is forced to work in two steps. First, forming the idea in the native language, and then converting it into English, which makes speech feel heavy, delayed, and unnatural. This delay is not a problem of intelligence, but a habit of processing, and habits can be changed with consistent mental practice. Real fluency begins when the mind stops relying on translation and starts forming thoughts directly in English, even if those thoughts are simple at the beginning. At first, this feels uncomfortable because the brain is used to a familiar system of thinking. But comfort is not the goal in learning, adaptation is. When you start thinking in English, you begin to reduce mental load because there is no longer a need for conversion between languages. Words start appearing naturally in your mind as reactions to situations, objects, and emotions instead of being searched for through translation. This creates a smoother flow of speech, because what you think becomes what you say without delay. One of the most effective ways to develop this habit is to describe your surroundings in English throughout the day, even in your mind, such as naming objects you see, actions you perform, or feelings you experience, which slowly trains the brain to associate English directly with real life experiences instead of memorized rules. Another important part of this process is self-talk, where you speak to yourself internally or aloud in English about simple daily activities, plans, or observations, because this builds familiarity and reduces the fear of forming imperfect sentences. Thinking in English does not require complex vocabulary. In fact, starting with simple words is more powerful because it strengthens the foundation of spontaneous thinking. Many learners believe that fluency comes from learning difficult grammar structures, but in reality, fluency comes from speed of thought, not complexity of structure, and speed develops only when translation is removed. When you think in your native language, your brain automatically prioritizes emotional expression, but when you think in English, you begin to train your mind to express those same emotions in a new system, which gradually makes communication more flexible and confident. This shift also improves speaking confidence because hesitation decreases when words are already available in the thinking process instead of being searched for during speech. Over time, this habit rewires the brain so that English becomes a default mode of expression rather than a learned subject. At the beginning, there will be moments when you struggle to find words, even in your thoughts. But instead of switching back to translation, staying in English thinking mode helps the brain adjust faster. Mistakes in thinking are not important because thinking is a private process, and no one judges it, which makes it the safest environment to build fluency. The more you practice this internal thinking, the more natural it becomes to speak without pauses, because speech is simply spoken thought. Many learners underestimate this stage because it feels invisible compared to speaking practice, but it is actually the foundation that supports fluent communication. Without thinking in English, speaking often remains slow and effortful, but with it, speech becomes automatic and fluid. This transformation does not happen overnight, but it grows gradually as the mind begins to replace translation patterns with direct expression patterns, allowing ideas to form and flow in real time without interruption or mental conversion processes. Your voice has power in ways most people do not realize until they finally begin to use it consistently. Because every word you speak shapes your confidence. Every sentence you form strengthens your identity. And every attempt to express yourself adds a layer of courage that slowly transforms the way you see yourself in the world. Many people underestimate their voice because they focus too much on perfection, grammar, or fear of mistakes. But the real strength of communication is not in flawless language. It is in the willingness to express what is inside you without holding it back. When you speak, even imperfectly, you are sending a message to your own mind that your thoughts matter, and that message becomes the foundation of self-belief. Silence, on the other hand, keeps those thoughts locked inside, where they lose momentum and confidence slowly weakens over time. Every time you choose to speak instead of staying quiet, you are building a stronger version of yourself, because you are proving that fear does not control your expression. The voice is not just a tool for communication with others, it is also a tool for shaping internal strength, because what you repeatedly express begins to influence how you think about yourself. When a person speaks regularly, they begin to notice that their hesitation reduces, their clarity improves, and their ability to organize thoughts becomes sharper. Not because they suddenly became perfect, but because they trained themselves to use their voice without restriction. The more you use your voice, the more natural it becomes to express ideas without overthinking. And this natural flow is what creates real confidence. Many people stay silent because they believe their English is not good enough, but fluency is not a requirement for speaking. Speaking is the requirement for fluency. Every time you open your mouth to speak, you are building neural pathways that make future communication easier and faster. Even broken sentences carry value because they represent action. And action is always more powerful than hesitation. When you suppress your voice, you also suppress opportunities for growth, because improvement only happens through expression and correction. The voice also has emotional power, because it carries feelings, intentions, and personality, and when you express yourself regularly, you begin to understand your own thoughts more clearly. Many people discover their confidence only after they start speaking more, because expression reveals strength that silence keeps hidden. The process of speaking regularly also reduces fear of judgment, because repeated exposure to speaking situations teaches the mind that mistakes are not dangerous, they are normal parts of communication. Over time, You stop worrying about how perfect your sentences are and start focusing on how clearly your message is delivered, which is a major shift in mindset. This shift allows you to engage more freely in conversations, share ideas without hesitation, and participate in discussions that once felt intimidating. Your voice becomes a bridge between your thoughts and the world, and that bridge grows stronger every time you use it without fear. Even small conversations contribute to this growth, because consistency matters more than intensity. Speaking for a few minutes daily builds more confidence than occasional long speeches, because repetition trains the brain to treat speaking as a normal activity rather than a stressful event. As you continue using your voice, you begin to notice that words come more naturally, pauses become shorter, and expression becomes more fluid, not because you eliminated mistakes, but because you stopped letting mistakes control your willingness to speak. The power of your voice is not measured by how perfectly you speak, but by how often you choose to speak despite uncertainty, and that choice gradually reshapes your mindset, strengthens your communication skills, and builds a deeper sense of self-confidence that extends beyond language into every area of expression and interaction.